worldwide affairs have a place in your day, this is the place you will want to stay. The Ron Bobb-Semple International Podcast with your host, world-renowned voice of Garvey and global news commentator, Ron Bobb-Semple.
Greetings and welcome to the Ron Bobb-Semple International Podcast. We will be addressing global issues that impact our day-to-day lives.
On July 7th, Haitian President Jovenel Moise was assassinated and his wife Martine wounded in an overnight raid on their home, tipping the crisis-hit Caribbean nation into a renewed state of political uncertainty. Haiti's embassy in Washington, D.C. released a statement on behalf of the government saying Moise had been killed in a, quote, well-coordinated attack by a highly trained and heavily armed group, unquote. We are privileged to have join us to chat about this assassination and its consequences, pro-democracy and human rights attorney Ezili Danto. My sister, greetings and welcome back to the Ron Bobb-Semple International Podcast.
Honor and respect. Thank you so very much for inviting me.
You're very much welcome, my dear sister. Knowing the history of the country in which you were born, why is Ayiti under so much scrutiny and imbalance?
Because we won't obey. We won't be enslaved. We fight back. We're the only one without a Eurasian benefactor. We are that independent Black nation. And I just want to say to your audience first, I run the Free Haiti movement, and I've been doing it for almost 17 years since the Western barbarians' return on our bicentennial. That answers your question. Because Ayiti, they changed the name to Haiti for a reason, but it's pronounced Ayiti. Because Ayiti beat three powerful European nations in combat, we certainly destroyed this idea of white body superiority because we beat Napoleon's greatest armies, England's armies, and Spain's armies, and a US embargo. The elites that run the world have never gotten over it, and they keep coming back. And they did come back in 2004 by deporting the duly elected president into Africa. His name is Jean-Bertrand Aristide, and I was his lawyer the first time he was taken down, and he was taken down twice. So, I've gone through two coups d'etats. This one that happened on July 7th is not done on behalf of the Haitian people. We are not spinning in chaos, as everybody is saying. Haitians have been fighting the disorder that the Europeans bring in. We don't create the disorder. We actually know that our government doesn't represent our interests. So it doesn't matter to us what they do or how they die. They don't represent our interests. They represent the interests of the core group of nations, which is the only place on planet Earth Western diplomats have gotten together to as one fist. And those Western diplomats, for people who want to know who are the enemies, who created this, who is responsible for this assassination of the most unpopular president that Haiti has. His name is Jovenel Moise. Obviously, we are not the violent ones. Haitian people have been saying that this man is corrupt. He is doing international interests, and we don't want him to represent us. But we did not kill him. We wanted him to go before a court of law and answer for the massacres of our people that has been happening during his reign. So in terms of this chaos, the only chaos there is that the European, which are made of a core group, and the core group is led by the United States and two white women, and their names are Michelle Sisson. She is the U.S. ambassador to Haiti, a career hit woman for Empire. The other one is another white woman. Her name is Hélène Lalume, and she is a career 38-year retired now U.S. hit woman, or euphemistically called a ambassador. And these diplomats, Hélène Lalume is the current head of something called BNU, which is the UN mission in Haiti. So these two white women, the U.S. Embassy ambassador and Ellen Lalume, who is the UN representative in Haiti, they're the ones that are running Haiti. They're the ones that just, once their puppet Jovenel Moise was assassinated, it seems by these same powers, these same terrible powers who imposed Jovenel on us, now they are moving ahead with another puppet, which was the de facto prime minister, Claude Joseph. And they're essentially told the Haitian people, this is your new government. Claude Joseph is going to be your acting president. Claude Joseph was fired 2 days before Jovenel got assassinated, Jovenel Moise. Jovenel Moise, the de facto unpopular, massacring, murderous, money laundering, indicted president of Haiti, had named another person to be his acting prime minister. His name is Ariel Joseph. Upon the death of Jovenel Moise, Ellen Lalume, the UN representative in Haiti, essentially said, here is your transitional government. It's going to be made up of the fired prime minister, who was fired 2 days before Jovenel's death. And I see a lot of speculation about whether he could have been responsible since he has benefited the most. His name is Claude Joseph, and he is a National Endowment for Democracy created political personality. And then the one that was supposed to be the prime minister is now the prime minister, and this one is the acting. So we are not in this. What's happening in Haiti right now is the core group of nations, which are France, Canada, United States, Germany, Spain, Brazil, and then they have European Union nations, a representative from the European Union, a representative from UN, and a representative from the OAS. Those are the 9 confederated groups who run Haiti. They are responsible for this assassination in many ways, and I'll be happy to explain those ways for you.
President Moise was adamant that his mandate ends on February 7th, 2022, but protesters felt that he should have been out of office on February 7th, 2021.
There is no doubt that his illegal term, which nobody gave it to him, but the OAS and the UN and the core group, was over February 7th, 2021. And when that was over, I guess the core group decided that he was doing such a good job for them, they'll give him another might makes right year. So he continued on. As he continued on, the Haitian opposition named a provisional government because they did not recognize his term as the United States does. But the United States is very, very powerful. It has money. But I can tell your audience that in terms of the Haitian Constitution, in terms of even the Haitian Supreme Court, which is a little controversial, and in terms of at least 3 American law schools, including Harvard, who looked over our law, and in terms of my analysis of the law, I'm a Haitian lawyer, his term was over. But the United States just came in and said he can have another year. But in between that year, Jovenel was going to amend the Haitian Constitution. This illegal person who has extended his illegal term was going to do a referendum this coming September. He had put it for July, but there was so much controversy and so much protest, he had postponed it. But in that referendum, this is what he was going to do. In Haiti, if you're a president, you can't have 2 consecutive terms, which is why he's in office, because his patron, Michel Martelly, wants to come back into office and essentially put his lover, Jovenel Moise, in power. Somebody nobody knew, like John McCain's marketing person, Antonio Sola. So they marketed this guy who came out of nowhere. And so his referendum said that you can have 2 consecutive terms because now that's forbidden in the Constitution. And then what he really, really wanted, and what's really important to this assassination, was amnesty, that when his term was actually over and his handlers didn't want him anymore, he did not want to have to go into exile, and he did not want to have to face a drug charge in Miami like the other paramilitary folks that, like Noriega or Guy Philippe, that when they are CIA assets and when they're finished with them, they end up in Miami. So he was assassinated because perhaps some of the things he was trying to do to have leverage over his handlers.
Why do you feel it was apparently rather easy to assassinate Jovenel Moise, the president of Haiti, who was ruling by decree, as you mentioned, after dissolving a majority of parliament in January 2020, after no legislative elections were held?
That question answers itself. So it had to be an inside job.
Okay, that was rather brief.
I can go into detail. I just wanted you to have a chance to ask me questions.
Well, who could have been responsible for the act? After all, a previous attempt was made on his life, wasn't there?
Now, that was never something that we looked at as the truth, right? So
then clarify it for us, please.
I will. All right. First, let's go back to 2019 so your audience can see. I have a piece out that I'd like your audience to maybe, it's on my website. It's called The Western Barbarians in the Role of Russia, Turkey, Venezuela May Have Had in Hastening the Assassination of the War Criminal Jovenel Moise and Who Benefits. And I outline very thoroughly that theme. But if we go back, if people want to understand, do not pay attention to the colonial narrative. Right now, the great Haiti disaster story, all these people are salivating. I guess, coming out of COVID, they need a distraction. They're salivating over the great Haitian disaster story. But let me tell you that in 2019, very relevant thing happened. Mercenaries that were hired by Jovenel Moise and his oligarchs came into Ayiti. We never found out what they came to do, because Michel Sisson, the U.S. ambassador, took them out of Haitian prison and on a flight to Miami, and they never faced justice. So Haitians don't know, but it's really important to parallel that event with what just happened on July 7th. How do I know, and why do I say that Jovenel Moise hired mercenaries? Because empire right now is falling. Rome is falling. So when Rome is falling and its own people don't want to fight for them, they bring in foreigners and they pay them to do their dirty job. So they brought in the far right Colombians. They brought in American military, former U.S. military, people with checkered past, people with dossiers and cases. And then they can get those people to go ahead and shoot the Haitian demonstrators in the head from long distance with sniper fire. That's what's been happening to us. And we had been essentially screaming about millions of demonstrators going into the street, knowing the courage of Haitians people don't even understand. They will still go into the streets knowing that the week before, when they went into the street, while they were walking peacefully and singing, "No, we don't want dictatorship. No, Jovenel needs to go. No, core group, get out of Haiti. And please, Russia, come and help us." While they were doing all that, as they were walking, one would all of a sudden fall, and we would look down and we would see a hole in his head. That's what's been happening to us. But we still went out. And those people that were doing it were mercenaries. And the evidence is everywhere on the internet. What they would do is they would wear head to toe black, right? Black mask, and then try to cover their hands so you can't see that they're white people. They would mesh with the Haitian police, you see, because the Haitian police all of a sudden are starting to wear the same thing. Or they would go into the neighborhoods and act like they're gangs. Haitian gangs, but they're Mossad trained mercenaries and U.S. Special Forces mercenaries getting paid millions of dollars. Now, on the night of July 7th, Jovenel had those mercenaries, supposedly he had hired and had been hiring these white guys to be his bodyguards. So on the outside of the presidential residence were the Haitian presidential resident guards. They were on the outside, and on the inside supposedly was his best, most trained, most skilled bodyguards. And those were the white mercenaries from private military security contractors. So the question is, where were they that night? How did they allow these other guys to just come in and say, this is a DEA operation? Remember, one of the reasons we didn't want Jovenel in power, because he wasn't qualified, number one, because he was indicted by the Haitian court before he even campaigned to be president for money laundering. Essentially had to be Colombian drug monies, because everybody knows the Colombians produce 70% of the world's cocaine, 70% of it. So the DEA is intricately involved with the drug dealing. They use Haiti as a transshipment space. They use Haiti's ports, which are owned by the Middle Eastern oligarchs that are in Haiti. Those Middle Eastern oligarchs are run by, the top two families. There are Bijou and Merv. And then they have a whole bunch of them. They come from Syria, Lebanon, and Israel. What they do is they take the drugs from Colombia, they put them on their ship, and those are the ones that are going in our ghetto neighborhoods, and then our young men are then being entrapped into drug dealing and all of that, and end up in prison to feed the military industrial complex. So that's where you all have to look at when you see these Colombians coming to Haiti, because they come from a very far right U.S. client state. The United States owns Colombia. If they had wanted to get rid of those drugs, they would. Now they're out of Afghanistan, where they were doing their drug dealings too. So they have to focus on Colombia. Now, because the Haitian people have been fighting, we finally got the United Nations mission out of Ayiti in 2017. They came in 2004. We got them out in 2017. There is a global retrenchment happening in U.S. military because they're getting their butts kicked all over the world because their own soldiers are tired of fighting wars for the global elite for resources, right? And coming back home and not feeling like they have any opportunities. So in this circumstance, there is no way that the United States did not know that this assassination attempt was happening. Why do I say that? I say that because the U.S. has built its largest embassy in the Western Hemisphere in Haiti, and it has the best technology.
Absolutely.
So imagine this idea, they're selling us this idea that a group of Colombian mercenaries who we know, just look at all the news, right? Some of them are DEA informants. And whenever someone tells you that a person is a police informant, they have a case against them, right? So they're criminals, right? Or they were entrapped. They said that altogether, initially, they said that there were 26 Colombians that were part of this hit squad, and then 3 Haitian Americans. 2 Haitian Americans was there that night. And then one, they say, is a Haitian doctor who was the intellectual author and who financed it. All of this stuff is very hard for us to look at because it makes no sense. What I want to tell people is, the United States hand is all over this. The DEA's hand is all over this. The FBI's hand is all over this. And so is the National Endowment for Democracy and USAID and the core group. So Empire did this, okay? Now, the question people should be asking is why? I'm going to give you 5 reasons why Empire is there, and you all can go ahead and look it up. Like I said, the United States has the largest embassy in the Western Hemisphere in tiny Haiti. The reason it does is because really that's a military base. It has thousands of people in there. They're doing their own business. But believe you me, they're creating chaos in Haiti to keep people diverted while they take care of the fact that Russia is in their water. The United States has lost essentially in the countries that it's been fighting since the 1990s. Which is they wanted to expand their domination at the doorstep of Russia. And so during the Clinton administration, they got rid of Yugoslavia and balkanized that space. And so you have countries like Georgia and Kazakhstan that the United States has their footprint which are very near Russia, and Russia is not having it. Russia's counter is to be in Cuba and Venezuela, which is in the airspace and waters of America. Haiti is between those 2 places. If Haiti falls to a popular elected government, the United States somehow feels that somehow we're going to be Russian and Russia is going to have an entrance into our space. So it has a military interest in Haiti, and that military interest is spying over Russia and Cuba and Venezuela, and believe me, controls everything. So it's very far-fetched that they didn't see in the middle of the night in a place that doesn't even have electricity, the lights of 5 to 9 Nissan patrol cars filled with heavily armed mercenaries going up to the president's residence. It's very hard for us to believe that because we know they have whisper mics. We know they have satellites. We know that they also have drones because those drones have been killing us indiscriminately. So that's the first one. The other 2 things you have to understand is that inside that house that should have been the private U.S. military, that is the paid bodyguard of Jovenel, where were they that night? The people on the outside, Dimitri Harold, the head of the Haitian palace security that was there, he is a U.S. asset. As a matter of fact, the United States has an arms trafficking case against him. You guys can look it up. His name is Dimitri Harold. All these men, most of these men were trained by U.S. and they all have a U.S. handler. Dimitri Harold, they tell us, had traveled to Colombia in a couple of months before this assassination. And some speculation was that he brought these people back. Part of the reason they had brought these mercenaries back is because we had fought so hard. We had gotten rid of the UN. The UN had left so much atrocities behind. They left children pregnant because they had raped our children. They left us cholera that had killed between 10 to 30,000 people. We did not have cholera. They were dirty. They were rapists, and they killed us indiscriminately everywhere. And by the time we got rid of them, and then, of course, when the earthquake happened, the Clinton administration came in and essentially dissolved parliament and said that we're going to build Haiti back better, and collected nearly $13 billion at the UN. And in terms of private charity, NGO, they collected about $8 billion, right? And then you see where Haiti is today. Nothing was left in terms of structure. So the United States has a hard time trying to get more troops into Haiti. So they bring in these Colombian mercenaries because they own Colombia, right? And so that's really what's going on. As you see the trickle down details in the news, they're going to tell you that there was a DEA informant in that space. There was a FBI informant in terms of the Colombians. So it doesn't matter to us as Haitian, right? I'm still mourning the death of Haitian women that Jovenel's forces and these paramilitaries had executed. Her name, one of them, who was part of the Free Haiti movement. She was an activist. She's you can find her on Facebook. Her name is Antoinette Duclair. She's a mother. She was helping the women that were being displaced as these forces were running rampage, trying to silence the protesters, silence people who they think might not vote for their far right candidates in these neighborhoods that are resisting. So they were bringing in gangs and arming gangs and giving gangs assault rifles from Israeli because we don't manufacture any guns. And then they were creating this whole narrative that Haiti's inundated with gangs. And the purpose was so that they can try to get troops back. Well, this assassination helps them get troops back because the first thing that happened on the day of the assassination is the puppet put in by Ellen Lalume asked the United States to come in. And that's what they've been wanting.
Sister Ezili, you might have answered my next question. The United States has a long history of intervention in Haiti. It occupied the country from 1915 to 1934. The U.S. has sent in Marines twice in the past 3 decades to restore order under President Bill Clinton and then again under President George W. Bush. What is it about Haiti, or Haiti, that the United States feels it has to protect and or control?
All right. Strategically, we are in a very strategic position that the U.S. feels we are in its airspace. We're just a few miles from Florida shores. This is part of their balance of power games with the other Eurasians, right? So that's the first thing. Second, as I've said, already, the Windward Passage there, across from it, the United States controls, even though they don't control all of Cuba, they do control Guantanamo Bay, which is connected to the Windward Passage. All the ships go through the Windward Passage, and Haiti's the other side of Guantanamo Bay. The United States wants to control that so they can control the Windward Passage. The Windward Passage is where you would go, cut through the Panama Canal so you can get to the Pacific. The United States likes that road, right? The U.S. corporatocracy and the cruise ships, they like that road. Now, if they had actually paid Ayiti tolls for going through our waters, every Haitian would be a millionaire, number one. Number two, as I already told you, Venezuela has the largest reserves of oil. Our geology says that the oil in Venezuela, the head is in Haiti's waters. So the United States is in Haiti's waters exploiting our oil, exploiting our underwater resources without having to pay for it. That's a very important thing. As you know, all over the Caribbean, the United States wants to control the energy sector, just like they do in Jamaica. I mean, they could take natural gas that we have, like in Jamaica, we're all in the same tectonic plate. There are 4 tectonic plates under Haiti. It rubs together, and that's how you get the resources of natural gas and oil. So Haiti is under, when Pangea was broken, right? Because we were one landmass, Haiti, the tectonic plate that rubs is the South American tectonic plate right there in Ayiti, broken right there. We have the Caribbean tectonic plate. We have the North American tectonic plate. There's like 4 of them. It's rubbing. We're like Middle East, right? That's how the Middle East has the oil, is because of the cracks in the earth that rubs together, and then it brings up this natural oil. So United States, it doesn't want to build infrastructure in your country to process that oil. It wants to ship it. Russia, on the other hand, for instance, if Russia was helping Jamaica, they wouldn't have to be so high in terms of the type of fuel they have, right? Number one is that they can steal our resources with impunity. They can continue to do the great disaster story and nobody's going to pay attention because, they tell everybody who's listening that we have no resources and they're just being good neighbors who want to come and bring back order. But that's the colonial narrative, right? They bring the disorder, right? Kill or look the other way while others were killing their own puppet president. And then now they want to come back and bring order. That is their template. They say, this is the European, that we have about 20 billion in gold. Haitian geologists say we have 100 billion in gold. Remember, Haiti's the first place that pedophile named Columbus came to, and it was gold that he wanted. But our gold is in our mountains. He didn't have the technology to take it out. The reason why they always want us to go to elections, and this is what they're pushing right now. Oh, they got the OAS and CARICOM and all the regional integrated Negroes running around talking about elections, right? So during the earthquake, for instance, in January 12, 2010, when that happened, and Mrs. Clinton was the Secretary of State and Obama was the president and Biden was the vice president, when the earthquake happened, everything fell down. There was no voting cards, but they came and told us that the most important thing in the world was elections because they control us through these elections by controlling one Haitien that they have dossiers on. So they brought Mateli in, and Mateli signed a contract that people need to understand and ask these questions with Israeli Mossad, a company that's made up of former Israeli officers. It's called HISL, HSL, Israeli Homeland Security. They today were given millions and millions of dollars supposedly to protect Haiti's borders, land, air, and sea. So our question is, where were they on the night of July 7th that they didn't see all of this, right? But really what they're doing is that company I found out was in Angola using their equipment to look for minerals and natural resources because they have that kind of equipment. So those are some of the reasons why I say that the United States and its allies, whether it was Colombia, Israel, Dominican Republic, they all knew because they all work together.
Sister Ezili, I must ask you this final question before I let you go. Why do you feel Haitians are still being marginalized, what with the treatment some of them are currently experiencing in Guyana and other Caribbean nations requesting visas for entry, even though Haiti is a member of the Caribbean community, CARICOM?
Because everyone's scared of us, because we fight back. Everyone is, when you say Haitien, everybody is scared of us. They have been taught since they were little kids in the Caribbean that we're the boogeyman. So they believe it. And also CARICOM running around acting like it's some regional democracy organization, just like the UN, which has 192, 194 nations with only 5 Eurasians having veto power over anything. The Negroes at CARICOM are so afraid of Haiti that we're the only place, because we have 60% of the population of CARICOM. Some of these CARICOM countries only have like maybe 3 million people, right? We have 13 million people. It's more, but let's say 13. They're afraid of, what's that thing that Public Enemy used to say? They're afraid of a black nation.
What does CARICOM have to say about President Moise's death?
Elections. Haitians must go to elections. That's what they got to say. They want us to go to election for legislation to pick up these same kind of guys with DEA dossiers on their heads in September. And they want us to go to election for president in December. And it doesn't matter what our pain is. It doesn't matter that in the last 3 months, 18,000 Haitians, mostly poor market women, have been displaced internally by the gangs and the paramilitaries and these mercenaries because the Haitian oligarchs want their land. So it doesn't matter that a lot of people are shocked and feel helpless that if they can kill us and then kill the president, then we mean nothing. None of this matters to them. CARICOM's going to come in just like the OAS, and they're going to say, just like they did in the earthquake when we were crushed and amputated limbs without anesthesia, you've got to go to election. That's what's important. And that's all they're going to say. But we, as Free Haiti, we tell them all, we are the descendant of Jean-Jacques Dessalines. You can kill us and the world can remain silent. You can take our refugee people who are running away from this fire and this Holocaust, and you could treat them like they are nothing. But I promise you, just like Antoinette Duclair, who just died, she was executed with a bullet to the head, a mother. All she was doing was helping the women that were displaced by their gangs of foreign military and local Black opportunists. We're coming back. And like Garvey, watch us in the whirlwind. Take me out, we're coming back.
Sister Ezili Danto, thank you very much for joining me on the Ron Bobb-Semple International Podcast. Your presence on this broadcast is always invaluable. Merci beaucoup.
Honor and respect. Thank you.
Thank you for spending some time with us. If you are so inclined, you can subscribe to these podcasts and donate to them by clicking on the Support the Show button on the website. Please continue to protect yourself and your loved ones during this global pandemic by observing all protocols. Be safe, be strong, and be aware. I'm Ron Bobb-Semple.